Because he's controlling all the screen share, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it?
Yes.
Did you get the Zoom invite?
But I just got.
All right, I'll read the script now if you're ready for it. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 23, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Yarmouth Community and Economic Development Committee meeting, this meeting of the Yarmouth Finance Committee meeting is being conducted via remote participation. All votes during this meeting will need to be conducted by roll call vote. Every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access and participate in the proceedings as provided for in the order. Public participation will be permitted by allowing members of the public to join this meeting via Zoom or via telephone. And Mr. Chairman, you can call a roll call for quorum to start the meeting. You're muted, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Jack,
Here.
Sarah,
Here.
Nate,
Here.
Brian,
Yeah.
Stephanie,
Here.
George.
Yeah.
And I'm here, so we're 100% attendance. To start the meeting, I think the first thing I want to do is actually just welcome Stephanie Cox as a new member. I met her yesterday or 2 days ago. And you're welcome to make a statement if you want, or we could just skip past that.
Hi, Steph.
Welcome.
All right. After that, I think we're minutes. So if, I know Beverly sent out the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look them over? Do I have a motion from anybody for a change or as submitted?
As submitted.
Second.
Brian seconded. No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
No, roll call.
Oh, you can do a roll call, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Jack, Sarah,
Aye.
Nate,
Aye.
Brian, Stephanie, George,
Right.
and I'm in favor. Let's see what's next. The next thing on the agenda is scheduling. So, and how many do we have to pick, basically? Like 12 maybe?
Well, so first would be like the frequency that you want to meet and then the total number. So I think if you want to go in the past until the budget season really ramps up, we go every other week starting in September probably.
Yep. So I'm good Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays.
Traditionally, Wednesdays have been.
Wednesday.
Has anything changed for anybody? Wednesday's a problem for anybody on the team?
No.
So we'll start Wednesdays. Is Monday a decent backup for days that we have conflicts? I'm seeing pretty much everybody's okay with Mondays.
Tuesday selectmen.
Okay, so you want to pencil in a couple of Wednesdays right now? When do you want us to start our first one, Dan? Like maybe the 12th? You want to go?
So I don't have my calendar in front of me, so you're gonna want to meet, I think, as a group the week before the selectmen's the 25th, because that's a Tuesday.
I'm thinking at least once.
Yeah, so you're gonna want to get that meeting so you can synthesize as a group what you want to put in front of them.
Does I'd just as well try to meet on the 11th at 6. I'm sorry, on the 12th at 6 o'clock for a quick hour or so and go over the course and stuff. And that gives us one more week to meet before we have to present or do the joint meeting with the selectmen. Is everybody okay with that? The idea?
You want it on the 11th or the, excuse me?
The 12th. I'm sorry, Wednesday the 12th.
Yeah, I was in the wrong month. Okay.
August Wednesday the 12th at 6 o'clock. Are we feeling pretty good about that? Okay. We don't need motions for meeting right at this point, Dan.
Hopefully I'll be home.
Okay. And then on that one, I think, tentatively speaking, if we want to pencil something, and we can pencil the 19th in just in case we don't get it resolved on the 12th.
Can't hear you, Robert.
I'm not muted. I'm sorry, I wasn't close enough. I said,
Yeah.
we'll ink in Wednesday, the 12th at 6 p.m.
Okay.
pencil in the 19th if we don't get it all done on the 12th. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Put in the selectmen's meeting on the 25th. It's not mandatory that we all attend, but I think I'm definitely going. That's a 6 o'clock, but we're on their agenda, so we may not even be up till 7. I don't know what we'll be on their agenda. It could be 7:30, 8 o'clock. Or 11. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I'm comfortable with that if everybody is trying to keep their Mondays and Wednesdays available. And we'll schedule those 2 now. And then we'll spread from there as we get more information in.
Okay.
Okay. We lost Dan, but let me see what's next.
I'm here.
Assignments. We only have 2 assignments, right? Dan, we have a CIPC and a personnel, right?
Yeah, the capital budget and personnel, right.
Is there anybody, everybody understands what the capital budget committee does, right? We talked about this in our last meeting. Is there anybody that wants to volunteer for it? I was on it last. It's a great board. They meet kind of early, 4:30. If that's a problem for somebody, I don't know. You'd have to work it out with them, but is there anybody that would like that? I mean, it's a good committee. Is there anybody else who wants to, other than Brian? I'm hearing none, so I'm comfortable with appointing Brian to the capital budget committee. We don't need to be any more formal than that, do we, Dan?
No, you just need to roll call it. Well, you can appoint it, but I take a roll call vote,
Okay.
just to
We'll take a
confirm
roll
it.
call on appointment. You want to do it as a motion then, Jack? Okay, I have a motion from Jack that Brian be appointed to the capital budget. I have a second. Stephanie has seconded.
Second.
I got that. Seeing no discussion, let's go to a vote. Jack? Aye. Sarah?
Aye.
Nate?
Aye.
Brian? Aye. Stephanie? Aye. George?
Aye.
Aye, and I'm aye. So Dan, you're the next one up on this. This is the Board of Selectmen is what's next on the agenda. Oh, personnel.
Yeah, so on the 25th of August, does everybody hear me all right?
Missed the personnel board appointment.
No, I was gonna bring up the personnel. Typically, the chairman has been on the personnel. I would like to continue with that if anybody doesn't have any objection for that. I'm not sure I'll stay the entire time, but I've never been on it or seen it, so I'd like to spend some time on it. We need a motion for that one too, Dan?
Yeah, to make you I think you're fine as the chairman.
Okay,
I might have to go back to the charge and look to see, maybe it's an automatic that the chair
yeah, I
sits
don't
there,
remember. It's just been,
unless you delegate it.
it's always been that way.
Yeah, it's true. It's
Yeah,
definitely
Jack was on
something
it.
you don't want to miss.
Mhm.
The last 2 were chairman.
Yeah, because Joe thought it was too stupid to throw out to people.
Yeah.
So Dan, I've got you next on Board of Selectmen joint meeting.
Yeah, so, in my time here in town, there's been with the finance committee, there's every year, there's a certain amount of dialogue that goes on, and the finance committee has, I think, kind of galvanized themselves as it relates to some ways to do business financially that they would like to get on the radar screen of the Board of Selectmen. So one of the things that's driving what we're asking the finance committee to participate in is in September, the Board of Selectmen will issue to me budget guidance. And that comes from a document called the budget policy document. So I sent, Robert, did you have a chance to send that email out to everybody?
I didn't, and there's about 9 attachments or something, so I'd be flooding everybody's mailbox just before the meeting, and I was like, we'll talk about it in the next meeting. I'll get it out.
Yeah, so I sent to Robert, I can do this kind of really quick here. So the budget policy statement, once that gets set by the Board of Selectmen, what we do in administration is then kind of cast in stone, and we formulate the town's budget based on this guidance. So I'm going to read the 11 points of the guidance that came from last year. Now, historically, it hasn't changed a lot, but it is important that whatever it is that you'd like the board to consider going forward, that you get it in front of them on the 25th so that they can have a conversation about putting it into the policy statement. So number one is it says the budget will be shaped by the Board of Selectmen goals. And Robert has a copy of the goals he can send to you. So the board took a vote on 10 goals that drive the overall agenda for administration on Tuesday night. They're also right now posted on the website. So if you wanted to see them, you could see them there, and they were in the packet for the Board of Selectmen's meeting. So the budget will be shaped by the Board of Selectmen goals and the financial management policies adopted by the board. So that's policy number one. Number two, the budget will provide for essential town services and may include an increase of up to 2.5% for the DY and Cape Tech regional school districts within the limits of the Proposition 2.5. So when we go to build the school budgets, before we get their assessments typically come in kind of later in the spring. We will take the year over year number from the last assessment and we will build the budget in the fall. We'll add 2.5% to that. Now, historically, up until this recent year, the DY budget has been well and above that, usually in the neighborhood of like 500 to 750,000. And that drove Prop 2.5 overrides the last few years, but I think 3 out of the last 4 anyways. So with the new agreement, financial agreement with DY, we were significantly underneath that for the first time in a long time. So we have to be careful of watching that. But if that's what the guidance is for this year, that's how we'll build the budget for next year's DY school budget. Cape Tech's budget, actually, I believe for the first time in a real long time, went up and above the 2.5% when it was originally forecast,
All the
because we
kids.
had an uptick in the number of Yarmouth students. Their operating budget is split amongst the student count amongst the sending towns. There's 12 towns that send kids to Cape Tech. Although I just got a document from them this month, they reforecast their assessment. I think, if my math is correct, what we passed at town meeting is $70,000 more than what their most recent assessment is. They're operating off a 1/12 budget that's allowed under very special circumstance, and COVID-19 is qualified for that. Plus, they are using more of their E&D fund, their stabilization fund, and they also reduce some other expenditures, and that dropped our assessment. So in a case like that, when they send us the bill, when the budget is done for the year, when all the bills are sent, we should have a $70,000 surplus from Cape Tech. Number three, the number 3 policy is fully fund contractual obligations as required by collective bargaining employment agreements. So at town meeting this past year, we had a sum of money, about $250,000, to apply against contracts that are upcoming in the upcoming year. So right now, we have contracts that we need to settle. We're just actually beginning that process with YPD. They have 2 collective bargaining units for sergeants and lieutenants and 1 for patrol. And we also, just before town meeting, we settled a 1-year contract with one of our SEIU units. So that's where the money gets paid for, to pay for those newly settled contracts. Now, once we're into a contract cycle, like as we build the budget now, that SEIU budget or the SEIU payroll will be built into the FY 21 budget. So 20 should be FY, at this point it'll be FY 21 budget. So, or 2022 budget, excuse me. So that's how come we don't carry a super large number on the article from year to year, is because once the contracts are settled, we pay for it out of operating funds. Number 4, fully fund utilities. Otherwise, if we didn't, they'd shut things off. The pension liability, and that's a state requirement. So we get an assessment by the Barnstable County Retirement Board. And general insurance obligations. And that means like town employee health insurance. We get a number from the Cape Cod Municipal Health Insurance Group, and we budget to that. We also carry a significant amount of property and casualty insurance, and workers' comp and unemployment. So those numbers are generated off of estimates that we get annually from the various insurance companies. So for instance, last couple of years, Cape Cod Municipal Health Insurance has had a 0 increase to the towns. I can't say that's going to go on forever, but what that means is in the budget line for that upcoming year, we don't put any increased funds to that. Property and casualty, we've had a lot of losses here in town over the last few years. It's obvious with the different storms and of course the tornadoes. So that number has been going up pretty significantly, but we also do a lot of things during the course of the year to get credits. So for instance, they told us that plan for about a 10% when you're building the budget increase, ended up being, I think, 7%. And then in the meantime, we also got about $140,000 credit for doing things that they asked us to do that give us credit. So we fund those things very conservatively because you don't want to run short. Interestingly, we had quite a debate with the board earlier this year on unemployment. We had budgeted a lot of extra money for unemployment this year, about double the number, from about $15,000 to 27 or 28,000. And there was a little bit of pushback on that to cut it back. Now that was before COVID-19. So then COVID-19 hits, and lo and behold, we had more layoffs and furloughs than we've had in a long time. So that line item actually was expended prematurely. So we had to do some transfers at the end of the year to pay that line. That may end up staying with us for a while because of the circumstances that we're in. So what we'll end up doing when we start building the next year budget, we'll put even more money towards that than we had done even this past year, because we don't want to do supplemental appropriations like that. And then utilities is an estimate every year. And in fact, I believe we held the line. I think it's level funded on electricity and gas this year. So that's good news. Number 5 is specifically retiree health insurance costs. So our retirees, when they retire, they're entitled, if you serve 10 years of employment with the municipality, you're entitled to get insurance when you retire until you go to age 65. Then you move to a Medicare program. So a lot of police and fire retire early, somewhere around age 55 or 56. So from 55 or 56 to 65, they're going to need insurance. So because they've had service more than 10 years in the town, they're entitled to that. They pay 50% of that cost. Their premiums are roughly about the annual cost on a basic HMO that we're running right now is like $22,000. So $11,000 for the employee, $11,000 for the town, more or less. It's close. So the employees, the retirees, were obligated to pay that percentage through. So what you're going to hear on the Finance Committee is a term referred to as OPEB, other post-employment benefit. And this has been a little bit of a conversation with the board as it relates to what to do with this. So the easiest way to explain that is every 2 years, the town gets an actuary done, a study done of what our obligation would be to pay the OPEB liability to our retirees, not our actives, our retirees. And so the board a few years ago made the decision to begin funding that dollar value on an annual basis. That's referred to as ARC, or annual required contribution. Now, it's important to point out there is no statutory obligation to pay the ARC. However, by paying the ARC, you are deferring, or if you will, you're paying down your obligation on all these employees that we hire today, right? So it's a good thing to do that if you have the money. However, when you're talking about throwing at that liability that's not necessarily due today, you're talking maybe $500,000 or $650,000 thereabouts to pay the ARC. So if you weren't paying the ARC at all, the town, I think, would have about maybe an $8 or $9 million OPEB liability. I forget what the latest number is, but we can certainly get that for you. That money would become available to you to use how you want. Now, other communities, some pay it as they go, and they don't do much at all about putting away any money in a trust fund. That's called pay as you go, and that's legit. You can do that, but that can also be a strike against you when you get your bond rating. So So we've done pretty good here in Yarmouth, and we're right now, the last, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row, we've fully paid the annual ARC. And that going forward, if we run into some significant operational expense items that for whatever reason the bottom drops out in the economy like we're experiencing now, there is a sum of money that if the board so wished, they could vote to not fund the ARC for a year or reduce it, and you'd have some extra money available to finance the town. So that's policy number 5. So that's been in there for a few years now. Number 6 includes $1.5 million out of the levy to pay for routine capital spending. Now, back about 10 or so years ago during the downturn, this took a big hit here, and they used that money at the time to pay operational costs, even after some significant layoffs. So now we've built capacity to be able to provide capital budget committee with that 1.5 million number. So in September, the departments will begin to put together their capital requests, their 5 and 10-year lookouts. And the capital budget committee will meet through the fall and the winter to prioritize or rank those based on the interviews with the departments. And so that's money being paid out of the operational fund. So interestingly, by being able to do that, the town has been really successful in paying for, heavy equipment like dump trucks and loaders and things of this nature, all the way to, regular vehicles like police cars, with cash. So our balance statements are very clean as it relates to how much total debt of a community that we have. Okay. And we can talk about that a little bit later as far as spending, because that'll come up with the water department. So what's occurred to finance committee for sure and capital budget is the amount of needs that are in front of the town are larger than we have cash available to pay. And I also included in that email that Robert will send around to you is what the rules are for a capital ask. And it's typically something worth more than $10,000 that's going to last some number of years. So what's happened is there's a number of big ticket items that come in front of the committees year after year, and there's been really no significant appetite or plan to address those. And we want to, the finance committee over the last 2 years particularly has said, let's work to come up with an idea on, we now know what these liabilities are. Let's have a plan to pay for those. And we'll introduce you at a high level to one of those topics tonight. So that's the, number 6 is the policy related to routine capital spending that's in the budget. Now, again, because of COVID-19, we've deferred actual spending on those items in the event that we need it for operating revenue. Okay. But if the budget receipts come in pretty healthily at the end of the year, which we'll know soon, then we could actually go back and install some of those items that were on that original capital spend list. The next one is number 7. That's include $1.2 million for road maintenance fund. So where did that come from? Is some number of years ago, the town had some debt service drop off, and instead of having it retire from the books and no longer be part of the taxpayer's obligation to pay anymore, they went out and they did an override, not an exempt one, but an override that adds to the tax levy year over year. So the override passed, and so why the roads in Yarmouth look so good and are well so maintained is because we've been able to put 1.2 million plus or minus $100,000 or $150,000 towards roads and our state road money towards that effort to maintain the pavement integrity. That's kind of like the third rail that I've learned in town. The Board of Selectmen said, when we sold this to the taxpayers some years ago, it was specifically with the intent to use it for road maintenance. So they've held the line on that. Okay, but that theoretically is extra money in the budget that, if you had a real disastrous situation, you could defer some road work for a while and use that. Number 8, preserve debt drop off for future capital borrowing or capital reserve fund contributions. Now we've done that. Our amount of principal and interest debt service in the budget's pretty low right now. And to the extent possible, we have put that excess money as it's come off the books into capital reserve funds, and those fund balances, we can get those to you for the next meeting. They're in pretty good shape. I think our stabilization's $4.5 million, and the capital reserve fund might be just a little south of $2 million. And then number 9 is based on free cash certification, commit up to $1 million to unrestricted stabilization. So coming out of the 2008-9 downturn, the town stabilization fund was completely emptied, if you will. So we've spent, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, rebuilding that to the point where it's about $4.5 million now. And you should have, it should roughly represent about 5% of your tax, if you can raise your revenue. So if the town's budget is, it'll be in the neighborhood of our target number is like $5.5 million. So we're just a little bit under the 5% that we need to be at. But that's good though. So that there is some flexibility with that number, because perhaps there's something that you want to pay or put towards debt service somewhere else now in the budget. You could do that. And number 10 is create additional recurring funding sources to meet future borrowing needs. Because they knew that there was some significant capital projects on the horizon. So this is a good example of a couple things that are in front of us now, and one of which we'll talk about tonight in more depth. So we do know, as a for instance, that we have a huge backlog of water system related expenses that we're going to need to fund at some point in the future. And you fund the water department through user receipts or rate receipts. Rate payers pay into that. You pay for your water. At the present rate of charging, which the rate hasn't gone up in 24 years, I was told the other night.
Yeah.
We have fallen way behind on repair work that needs to be done. So we don't have enough cash on hand to take care of all the things on the very near term horizon that we have to do. And we certainly don't have enough cash to finance our way on those projects that we should get to within the next 5 to 10 years. The other big liability that didn't have any way to pay for it was seawall improvements. And now we have so much waterfront. That's a very costly infrastructure that had no specific revenue source linked to it to pay for it. So a couple of years ago, the board raised the fee on daily beach pass payers, and a percentage of that daily fee now goes into a beach capitalization or stabilization fund. That fund presently has just a little bit less than $100,000 in it, and it builds every year. So the theory is as everybody pays, comes into town and pays a daily beach pass, they're contributing to the future revenue stream to pay for our infrastructure improvements on the seacoast. And then the last big one that, of course, sucked up a lot of time in the last 2 years has been wastewater and how to pay for that without going to the levee. And we're going to have to save that. That's a couple of meeting conversations on its own. But to the extent possible, the town has done a really good job trying to find sources of funding that can recur and not be on the tax levy. And there's, one of the big areas that we're moving towards in the future is 50 Workshop Road, which is the septage in the transfer station location. We have a request for proposals now for solar generation or some other economic project, and that lease revenue, if successful, would represent recurrent new revenue source to the town. And we would likely apply that to some other liability that needs to have a funding source on it. So there's a lot of different obligations out there that we're trying to be creative on finding revenue streams. The town also, by the way, has a fair amount of land holdings that may also be identified in the future for other lease arrangements that could represent recurring funding coming into the town. And we now have a system in place to begin bringing those to the selectmen for consideration. So that, in a nutshell, is what number 10 is about. Number 11 is add no new staff positions unless they can be funded with corresponding budget reductions or a secure or recurring funding source, and only after the above obligations have been met. So typically what ends up happening here is when somebody retires, we always look at that opportunity as, well, do we need to do something somewhere else? And as a, for instance, recently we had a retirement of the town's land surveyor. About 12 years ago or 10 years ago, we cut the town engineer's position for budget cuts. And so what the Jeff Colby, the DPW director, had an opportunity now is like, what would, at our point now in time, what's more of need to the town? A town engineer with all the projects that we have to design and manage, or a surveying person? And we made the decision to repurpose that salary to the town engineer. So for the first time in many, many years, we now have staffed the town engineer's position. So hiring new staff, and we hired an HR director a couple of years ago, but we were able to do that through a significant restructuring of the expense structures on a couple of departments, so that it was, and that being a net labor savings. But that does put a lot of pressure on the staff, because they never necessarily know if somebody retires, if they're going to get a person back. Now, on the converse to that, we have also done a lot of efficiency and modernization, such that, like, for instance, the amount of activity that people can conduct commerce with the town, almost everything now can be done on the internet with the town. And not too many years ago, you would have needed to come into town hall. Now, there are still people in our population that, for a lot of different reasons, still want to come into town hall. And recently we've had a limited opening. We're seeing between 30 and 60 people a day coming into town hall to conduct business from the hours of 10 to 2. And when I look at the sheet as to why did they come to town hall today, 95% of what they're doing, they could have done online, or they could have done by a phone service. But for whatever reason, they felt like they needed to come see us. So, the town, I think, in general, over the years, has done a really good job with developing efficiencies through modernization and technology. And so, to some large degree, the staff reductions that were made about a decade or so ago, a little bit more now, have been a little bit mitigated by that activity. Now, there's certain things government does, for instance, like take care of folks when they're in need through the police department or through the fire department, that it's difficult to come up with a funding source. It was identified, though, a couple of years ago that the Yarmouth Fire Department is significantly understaffed. And in fact, they hadn't had new staff added to them since 2003. So under item number 11, how did we get new staff? Well, we ended up securing a grant to pay for 4 new paramedics, and we had to amend, if you will, the ambulance rate structure. So when somebody calls for an ambulance, the billing structure had to go up to pay for that. So we were able to hire 4 new paramedics, and we have a revenue stream to offset that. But we're still probably 12 paramedics down, and there is no easy way in sight to get more paramedics on staff. Now, there's a couple things you got to be mindful of. One is, if we invite another big housing project into town, well, that'll even make the situation with the fire department even more problematic if we don't do something to mitigate the staffing. So maybe say if a Mayflower type project came to town in the future, you would add a special assessment, if you will, potentially, or an agreement where they pay a little bit more to pay for their own ambulance service type of idea. So we have to be very careful about doing things that add more human beings to the full-time resident population. And I think where that goes is on Route 28. You got to take a look as a community. Do we want to incentivize any more housing projects out there? So it's a delicate balancing act. And I know Robert will speak passionately about the need to try to get more commercial activity out there so we can stop the erosion of the commercial participation in the tax levy. But those 11 points are what we build the budget against. And so if there's an opportunity for the finance committee to weigh in, we have to do that in August. So the board will meet the timelines set out by charter to get me these instructions so we can start building the budget in late September, early October.
All right, thank you,
Dan.
Dan.
Dan,
Yes.
on water, could we tie the water bill to the cost of living?
Well, so interestingly, in the rate structure that you have, you could certainly do that, Nate. That's a good point. And some communities do have what I call a more progressive rate structure where they're visiting that rate structure, every couple of years. They might not necessarily have a CPI associated with it, but certainly they're adding in, 1 or 2% charges. Now, water rates, Jeff can speak more to this, with more authority on this. In my recollection of water rates is you have a base rate that finances, pretty much the baseline minimum activities of the department. Then you have consumption. So one of the things with water is that the more you use, the more you'll pay. If you don't want to pay more, you don't use so much, right? So I think it's fair to say that to have a utility in the world operating for 24 years without a rate increase, while electricity's gone up, the cost of chemicals have gone up, imagine what labor has gone up in 24 years, is problematic. And if nothing else, just to account for the cost of labor. So if we build into labor contracts a 2% COLA with all the different, what they call lanes and steps that unions negotiate with, that actual one individual person is not probably going to get a 2%. Probably get more like a 3 or 3.5, maybe in some instances if they go to a significant longevity step or something, because they've gone from 20 years to 25 years, maybe it's even 4 or 5% for that individual.
Yeah.
And yet the rate structure stayed the same.
Yeah, I know that my water bill for a 1/2 or 3/4 inch water line is $21 a quarter, and then I'm billed for the extra once a year.
Yeah, that's a
Okay,
pretty good deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is. So, I'm just trying to think of a way that people wouldn't, oh man, you're gouging us, but yet, we could have a consistent increase, that we could easily explain to the town members.
Yeah. So what you got to do in a situation, because there's like no institutional knowledge, probably very few people that would go to town meeting that remembers the last time there was a rate increase. You know what I mean? So we've got to start having this public conversation about what's in front of the department, what's the general cost of living every year, and then develop, I'd say probably at this point, a decade view of what rate increases need to be over the next decade, so that they're able to be accommodated within all the other things people got to pay for,
Yeah. Okay. I think that's got to be part of our discussion.
So, Dan, I have new businesses next, but Jeff has been out there for a while. Do you want to bring him in?
Yeah, so what I wanted to have the conversation with Jeff is the part of the presentation, and you have a copy of the memo that Jeff generated for the board. This is a perfect opportunity to weigh in on how the town should finance things in the future. Jeff's got lined up some very critical needs on what I would think are it's a very easy thing to wrap your hands around as it relates to what's in front of us and the cost and some obligations on or ways in which to pay for that. So I'll turn that over to Jeff to explain better than I could.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. No, I thank you for including me. We had a very good, robust discussion with the Board of Selectmen on Tuesday about just this very topic, talking about how our water rate study is going to be available very shortly. In fact, I expect to see some options from our consultant as early as tomorrow, so we can start to have that dialogue and the questions about whether you build in the cost of living or how you kind of step in a rate increase are all things that we're going to be having here in the next few weeks. And happy to come back to the board, to the finance committee to get some input as well on what that might look like. I'm sure the board would be very interested on your opinion. I can talk to Dan about what that might look like. But we do, as Dan indicated, we do have a lot of things on our plate that are coming up. One of the big ones, and we spent a lot of time talking with the board about that on Tuesday, was our pump station improvements. And now that's a project that's well under design, and we have sufficient funds to do the design. But the current estimate for construction is currently $7.2 million. And so that is a significant cost. The way the water projects have been done over the last 20 plus years is to pay for them out of retained earnings or with cash, essentially, as Dan had mentioned. And we don't have those types of funds to do that. Now we could stretch this out over 10 years and, with retained earnings, maybe get most of that done. But there's plenty of other projects, whether it's the Route 28 water main replacement or Route 6A water main replacement. We have water mains out there that are, 80 plus years old. And so we just have a huge backlog of projects that need to be done. Some of those water main projects, incidentally, can be done during wastewater projects. And so that we're only digging up the road or having a contractor dig up the road kind of in one area or one time in order to do sewer and water work. So we're looking to coordinate work as well. But in order to do so, we need to have access to significant funds in order to accomplish that. So that would change a thinking in town from paying for water projects with cash or retained earnings to more of a borrowing type of program. And so I think that's really where we want to engage the finance committee on discussions about how to pay for projects, and the fact that in order to get some of these done and address the backlog of projects, we're going to likely need to do that with borrowing. And the board seemed to be receptive to that discussion on Tuesday. Obviously, there's a lot more discussions to have about that, but I think commentary or support from the finance committee would be important to have as part of that overall project discussion.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to ask the board, does any questions? I don't see any. Stephanie has a couple
I
questions.
got one, Robert, I got one.
All right, George, you can go first, then Stephanie.
Are we gonna see these documents ourselves that were displayed?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're all ready to
James-
go on an email.
Okay.
An email, I don't know, noontime today or something like one.
Yeah, I sent it earlier
But
today.
I got like 9 packages of information from Dan midday. Go ahead, Stephanie. Stephanie has a question.
Yeah, so just, sorry, now we're echoing. Just a couple of questions about the total amount. I mean, you mentioned the 7.2 was for this one pump station, but have you done an estimate for the rest of the different projects that you're mentioning? I'd love to see like a Gantt chart or something that spreads out the total amount of cost and then over the period of time. I'm gonna stop.
We're getting feedback, Kyle. Do you know?
Yeah, so if you guys are going to be talking into computers in the same room, you need to mute and shut off the volume on the other one so there's no feedback.
Did you get what I said?
No.
Nope.
We've got everyone muted in this room. Me, Brian, and we're getting
Yeah,
feedback.
you also need to turn off the speaker on your computer.
We shut one.
Okay, how's that? Nope.
Come here.
Okay.
Oh, no, you gotta turn your volume down. Just turn your volume.
How's that? Yes, okay.
That's good. Yep.
Sorry about that, technology fun. So my question was just in terms of the total amount at this point estimated for the various needs. Just looking at that memo that was up on the screen, it looked like the 7.2, was that for that one pump station, Jeff?
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably something I could cover in a little more detail. We have 24 pump stations within our water system. And so that 7.2 is for the needs associated with all 24 pump stations. So although it is a big dollar number, it addresses some asbestos that's in ceiling tiles. It addresses some confined space issues with regards to getting down into areas where there's valves below the motors. It addresses repairing roofs, hatches in which to pull motors out of the pump station buildings themselves, replacement of doors and some windows. And so, that's why it's such a large dollar number, is it's really complete rehab of 24 pump stations for $7.2 million. And what we've proposed all along is that it be done in phases. In fact, I think I talked to the Finance Committee and Capital Budget kind of about, where we stand with those different asks. And we do have a portion of phase one that is funded currently, but we'll be going back to town meeting for the remainder of that first phase. And that first phase right now is anticipated to be $2.5 million with some additional alternates to that could bring it up to 3.7 if we do work on all 12 of the stations that are envisioned in phase one. So just to be clear, that large dollar number is over 24 pump stations. And that's really just one big project. It frankly is the biggest project that we have before us, in the next 5 or 10 years. But the other ones, such as the water main projects, the large water main projects on Route 28 and 6A, those are in the $4.5 million range each by themselves. And so there are other projects for, pretty significant dollars. These are all spelled out in documents that we have from our water consultant that was used to help develop the water master plan. And so they're readily available. I can send those out so that you have a good idea of what's ahead of us over the next 5 or 10 years for projects. That's no problem. I can send that along.
Yeah, that's specifically what I was getting at, is that I'm just looking at a list of, valve excising and flushing, sandy pond tank, fence upgrades, et cetera, and wondering what, the total would be for all of those, and the time frame for them. So kind of looking at them longitudinally, and then the total cost. And I think that having that in some kind of spreadsheet, a Gantt chart, something like that, that would allow us to get a sense of how much money would be needed and when, would help then inform what sort of approach we take to the water rate. That's all. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And that's actually going to be that's a great comment. That's going to be part of the water rate study. The water rate study not only looks at operational costs and how we fund them over the next 5 or 10 years, but also the capital needs and how those are funded and what rates need to look like in order to cover that. So that is all part of that really in-depth water rate study.
All right, I'm back. Dan, I don't think I had anything else on my agenda other than transfer, little admin stuff if somebody wants to bring something up. What do you
Yeah, there was nothing else. I wanted to introduce this topic, particularly to the newer members, about how the whole finance process begins the evolution. Normally, or since I've been here anyways, the finance committees they come into gear typically over the winter, and by that time the instructions for creating the budget are already out. So this is the beginning of the process, and based on the conversations I've been part of with the finance committee, wanted to make sure that the things that you have indicated to me are important to get addressed. You have that opportunity to get at the table with the Board of Selectmen before this guidance gets generated.
Open up for new business to anybody on the board? Jack, Brian, Stephanie, Nate, nothing? You good? Looking for a motion to, have a motion from Jack to adjourn, and you have a second? Brian, second. Do I have a roll call to exit, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay, roll call to exit. Jack? Aye. Brian? Aye. Stephanie? Nate?
Aye.
George?
All right.
Sarah?
Aye.
All in, right? Motion to